Welcome in Salesforce FXR. My name is Amit Chaudhary, and today we are going to talk about the Pardot Basic. And let me talk about myself. I'm a Salesforce MVP and the co-organizer of the Farmitagy Salesforce Developer Group. So we have a special guest today, Jessica, and she is going to talk about the basic of the Pardot. So let me hand over to her. Jessica.
Great, thank you. Yeah, and here are your credentials, Amit. Yeah, so I'm Jess. I am a Pardot user group leader here in London, although we're now called the B2B Marketers Group. I'm also a Salesforce and marketing automation consultant at Empower. I've been working with Pardot for, I think, 2 years now, but different marketing automation before that. So I've done a lot of marketing automation. And I also blog occasionally at Salesforce Ben's marketing section, The Drip. So you can find me there, and you can find me here on Twitter at Jess Pine. So I'm going to start today by talking about who needs Pardot, and obviously what the difference is between Pardot and Marketing Cloud. Some of you may be familiar with one or the other already. They have different areas, different specialities, and they're useful in different scenarios. So it's helpful to know which is which. So Pardot's strengths are lead scoring and engagement. So you can give, you can see what pages someone visits on your website, and you can give them a score, etc. Track their web behavior. You have some really nice analytics, particularly with B2B marketing analytics now. And it's really for nurturing and for long considered purchases. So if somebody will typically talk to a salesperson a couple of times to make a sale, that's probably a Pardot setup. Whereas Marketing Cloud is much more suited to transactional or e-commerce platforms. You've got more capabilities. There's the kind of the mobile features. So you can do text messaging, SMS messaging, push notifications as well. And its capabilities, particularly in dynamic email content and using data from different places, are a lot stronger. But it is also more difficult to use. So Pardot's quite straightforward to use. And then I've put B2B and B2C in brackets down here. So Salesforce is really moving to position Pardot as the B2B, so business to business marketing tool, and Marketing Cloud as the B2C, so business to consumer marketing tool. In most cases, that's probably true, but I've got clients from both sides who, so I've got a Pardot client, I've got a few Pardot clients actually who are actually B2C, and then I've got a Marketing Cloud client who is also B2B. So it really does depend, but I would say the biggest difference is Pardot is for long considered purchases, and Marketing Cloud is really suited to shorter, more transactional purchases. So, and Pardot and Salesforce sync natively. This is done via a Pardot connector user. It used to be that Pardot would sync everything that this user saw. So if you wanted to filter the leads that were pushed through to Pardot, you had to do that via sharing rules, which is obviously a bit of a pain to set up. But in this latest release, they've just released filtering options so that you can filter by record type or other criteria. So that's made things a lot easier for Pardot and Salesforce admins everywhere. So yay. The thing to know about Pardot is that if you're creating a lead in Salesforce from Pardot, that is done when you assign someone to a user. So you give them an owner. There are a couple of issues around data collision and sync errors that you need to be aware of. So at this point, I'm going to dive into Pardot for the first time. So I'll show you we go actually to the screen here. So this is our Pardot home screen here. You get a general overview here. I'm sorry, this is a training environment, so there's not much going on here. It's not very exciting. but you would normally see this is a graph of when you get new prospects added, so you're getting new people filling out forms, etc. And if we go to the connector, so under admin connectors, this is where we see how Pardot and Salesforce sync. And you can see here, you're just using a username here, so user in Pardot and Salesforce. And we have a very important thing here, which is the sync errors. So luckily I don't have any sync errors, yay. But if you had some, and I've seen orgs that have got thousands of sync errors, this is, sorry? This is where you would see those issues. So those prospects that have stopped syncing over to Salesforce. So if we go back to this slide, you'll see that I've said here we've got prospects. So any record, any person in Pardot is a prospect. And I know that's confusing terminology. So that can be it could be an existing customer, it could be a prospective customer, it could even be someone at your business. So it can be so this can be really it can be a bit confusing when you're just getting used to it, but just remember, a prospect is any record in Pardot, and prospects can sync to leads, contacts, and person accounts in Salesforce. So it really is any individual record. So yeah, so just if you as a Salesforce admin, the thing that you'll most need to be aware of is keeping an eye on those sync errors between Pardot and Salesforce. And there are various reasons those can happen. I'm not going to go into that in too much detail today, but it's generally because of data issues or validation rules or something like that. We've also got we can now have multiple prospects with multiple prospects with the same email address. That's what AMPSIA means here, which allows for a one-to-one sync. So if you have duplicate leads in Salesforce, you can also have duplicate leads in Pardot, which can obviously be an issue. So we'll come back to that later. Okay, so now we're actually going to take a closer look at the prospect record and what that looks like in Pardot, and how that syncs over to Salesforce. So here I can look at my full prospect list. So again, this is dummy data, so there's not much information here, but I can see all of my prospects here in a list. With their score, a couple of them have got a grade. So let's click into this top one, which is me. And you'll see we've got a really nice interface here. So we've got field information down the left-hand side. These are all default fields down the left-hand side. We've got a few custom fields here on the right. And these sync over to Salesforce, and just in the same way as they can sync one-to-one with Salesforce custom fields. And then we've got this section here, which is interesting, and this is the activity section. So this is where we can see things like email opens, if they've clicked a specific link, if they've completed a form, etc. You can also see here if somebody has visited pages on your website. Basically any activity that a prospect has performed, it will appear here on their prospect record. And you can see that some of these activities have got scores assigned to them. So this is where we can track how engaged someone is with us. So we've got different scores for different activities. So we've got a form here is 50 points, and a page view is 1. We've got 2 page views, so we've got 2 points for that. And we've got overall score here and a grade here. We'll be talking about that in more detail a bit later. But yeah, so this is the general overview. We've got a few more, you can get a bit more information from prospects up here on these different tabs. And if we've got time, I'll come back and show you more of those details. But you'll also notice that we have a cloud here, which is the Salesforce cloud. So if we click on that, it will take us straight to the relevant Salesforce record. So this is the record that syncs across. So we can see my lead here. We can see all of the basic information. We've got a few Pardot fields here. So when you install the Pardot managed package, which has to be downloaded from the help.salesforce.com, by the way, you can't download it from the App Exchange. You get a lot of fields that you can add to your page layouts with Pardot. Some of them are more useful than others, so I think just be careful about which ones you add because you don't want too many. And then you'll see here we've also got a list of activities. So those page views and and the email open that we saw here, we can also see here. So this means that your sales users can actually see what their leads have been up to on your website and in Pardot, what emails they've been interacting with right here on the page. So you might notice that this interface looks a lot like Classic. There is a new engagement history component that you can add to your page layouts, but because I'm in a sandbox, it's actually difficult to get that set up and to get approval for that. So I'm sorry, I don't have the new engagement history Lightning component to show you today, but it functions in much the same way as this. It just looks a bit more like this. And we've also got something interesting down here, and we'll talk about lists in a second. But you'll see that you can actually add or remove prospects from lists, to and from lists, right from their lead or contact page. So if your sales user has a phone call with a lead and realizes that they're not ready to buy yet, but would like to add them to a nurture journey that you've built in Pardot, you can do that right from here, right from the lead page, just by adding them to a list. So that can be really useful. Okay, so I'll go back to my slides. Okay, so lists are next. We have two types of lists in Pardot, and lists are really important because this is how email communications get sent. This is how prospects get added to Engagement Studio, which are the nurture journeys we were just talking about. So lists are how you manage your prospects in Pardot, and they're really important. It's important to understand that there are two differences, two main types of lists. We've got static lists and dynamic lists. So static lists, the prospects must be added or removed, but once they're in there, unless you do something to remove them, they will not change. They will stay in that list. So functioning in a similar way to a campaign in Salesforce that you might have set up as a list. Dynamic lists, on the other hand, are criteria based and they constantly refresh. So for example, you might build a dynamic list of all prospects who have an open opportunity in stage 5. And as soon as one of those opportunities closed won, then that prospect would be automatically removed from the list. So they've both got different uses, but they work really well together. I will quickly show you what it looks like to create a list in Pardot. So we go to marketing, segmentation, and lists. Click add a list here, and you'll notice that the interface is really user friendly. It's built for marketers, not necessarily for system admins, so it's easy to use and it's nice to pick up. So I'll just call this example dynamic list. I just click the dynamic list box here, click set rules, and we've got add new rule, and this is where we set our criteria. It's an interesting drop down. It's we don't have it's not very structured, this how you choose a rule, so it does help to familiarize yourself with that. We've got some weird ones, like there's a prospect time here, which is actually, this is where you choose when a prospect was last active or how many days ago they were created. So that's an interesting rule. But for example, we can choose information from an opportunity here. So we could say related with properties, as I just said. Let's say stage is And then because it's a related object, you can't choose from the drop down here, but we could type it in. So I could, call it nurturing or something like that. So just while we're talking about different objects, you can reference the opportunity object and the account object from within Pardot, so in rules, just such as this. But you can't update or create accounts or opportunities in Pardot. They are read only. So that is something key to remember. We also, you see we have match all and match any options here. That changes the and to an or, so using similar logic to that you get in Salesforce. And if you want to put brackets around something, you would add a rule group, and it allows you to change the logic within that rule group. So similar to Salesforce in a way, just obviously a different interface. And built to be user friendly, but maybe not quite as straightforward as you're used to. But yeah, so we have that dynamic list, and then we would click run rules, and that would take about 10 minutes to refresh in the background, and it would bring us up a list of prospects that those rules applied for. So that's how you would build a dynamic list, and a static list you would build separately and then add prospects to it. So if we move on to emails, so obviously Pardot is first and foremost an email tool, and there are two types of emails, and this can be confusing, so I'll just take a second to explain this. We have emails and email templates, and actually I suppose it functions in a similar way to Marketing Cloud. So emails in Pardot are a one-time send to a list. So this might be something like an email that you've written to send as your monthly newsletter. You would send that to a list. Whereas email templates, you can use it multiple times. So you can use them as the basis for list emails, but you can also use them in automations and in nurture journeys. And I find that users can get confused about these. In general, if you're building a new email, always build it as an email template, because you can always then copy that and you send it to a list as a list email later. But you can't do it the other way around. So always build your email first as an email template. And we have basic Pardot templates that you can choose from when you come to build an email template. So just choosing a campaign, we'll touch on that in a second. So when you build your email template, you choose your campaign, you choose whether you want it to be HTML or text, and you can also choose various things that it's available for. So you'll see list emails, which we were just talking about here. You can also choose to send it for one-to-one emails, auto respond to emails. So that's something like if somebody submits a form, you would automatically send them an email. And then drip and engagement program emails for those nurturing journeys. And when you create your template, you'll see, and these are the Pardot default layouts that you have to choose from. And we've got some responsive ones down here. So I'm just going to select the responsive 2-column image basic here, so you can see. You can also skip this and import your own HTML email templates, which is obviously nice to get you can really get your own design and brand on that. And so this is the Pardot email interface. We have content blocks, so you can click and edit here. We've got the usual toolbox. We can add images from hosted image files in Pardot, and you can move these blocks around to an extent. It's not drag and drop. I know that is something that Pardot are working from, because a lot of people have been asking for it. But it does have some flexibility. And when you if you import your own HTML, for these. Sorry, if you import your own HTML for these templates, you can build these editable content blocks into the email, so your users still find it helpful when they're editing. Something else that's useful that we have is dynamic content and variable tags. So the most obvious one that people use is hello first name when they're sending an email. You'll see we have a button here called variable tag, and this has all the field information that's available to use in an email, much the same as the merge field in Salesforce. So I'm just going to use first name here, and then we've inserted that in there. The more advanced thing that Pardot has, if you buy the, I think it's the Plus edition now and upwards, is dynamic content. And that's really useful. That's this little lightning bolt here. I don't have any to show you, unfortunately. But you would import some dynamic content here in much the same way as a variable tag, and it would just be called dynamic content 1 or something. Oops. I'll just get rid of that because it's just going to keep throwing up errors. But you would use it in much the same way. You can insert it using this button here, and that allows you to display different content based on a field value. So, for example, a common one is if you knew that somebody spoke English, whereas somebody else spoke German, you could display them different content in different languages based on that field value. So that's a really useful feature that that clients like, and you can also use that in the subject line as well. You also have testing capabilities. So you can send a test to lists. We've also got render tests built within Pardot for, I think it's the Plus edition and above. It is powered by Litmus, and it will show you what your emails look like across different devices, different email clients, and also what that inbox preview looks like. So that's a really useful one that people like a lot. And then you have another tab here where you set your sender information. You can choose to kind of make up a user almost. So I could do something like this. You can select a real user. You can select the prospects assigned user. So that would be the lead or contacts assigned user or owner in Salesforce, and also the account owner. So that can be really useful when you're trying to send emails that look like they're from the account owner, etc. And obviously you can use the account owner's name in a variable tag in the email as well. So you could say from Bob Smith if Bob Smith is the account owner. And here's where you set your subject line as well. So it's quite nice. It's very user friendly. Anyone can use it. Yeah, sorry, it's gonna keep throwing up errors, so I'm just going to cancel it now. But that is how that is what the email interface looks like. So that was an email template we were just building. You would then publish that to a template, and you could use that in various automations or different journeys. But you can also use it then to send a list email, which is where you build an email and you choose a list to send it to. And one other thing that you can do with list emails is A/B testing, and that will automatically, it will send the first batch of emails out to a percentage of your list, identify which email performs best, so which one has the most opens or the most clicks, depending on the criteria you set, and then send the remaining emails to the rest of send the winning email to the rest of your list. So it will kind of do that A/B testing and optimization for you. So that's a nice feature. Okay, so Pardot campaigns, until recently, were not the same as Salesforce campaigns. Pardot campaigns, you used to be able to only associate a prospect with one campaign. So it actually showed their source rather than being used in the same way as Salesforce campaigns are. Thankfully, that has now changed, and you can now connect Pardot and Salesforce campaigns and give them a one-to-one relationship. And this still has to be set up. It's not automatic, but it's much more useful because it means that prospects can now be in multiple campaigns, and so you can do much more advanced ROI tracking in the same way that you would with Salesforce campaigns. Obviously, that then makes it important to check that you're using contact roles correctly in Salesforce. But it's much more useful, and marketers really, it's very important to marketers to be able to track their marketing efforts and get that ROI. And there's some really great multi-touch attribution reporting dashboards that come with B2B marketing analytics, which was at one point called Wave, similar to Einstein Analytics. And this is included now if you buy Pardot Plus or higher. So a lot of people who are buying Pardot are now also getting B2B marketing analytics. So it's a really, really nice functionality. The one thing is that you do still have to manually add prospects to these campaigns. So Pardot campaigns, the source campaign is automatically associated. So as soon as the prospect, for example, submits a form with a particular campaign, and they would be automatically associated to that campaign. Whereas with Salesforce campaigns, you have to use a completion action or a rule to add the prospect to that campaign. So it's an extra step that you have to build. I've put for now in brackets because we're all hoping that this automatic association will be released soon, and that is something that Pardot are working on. So watch this space. Okay, and so when we talk about prospects, there are a few different ways that they can be created. So they can be created via an import in Pardot, which once you have Pardot connected to your Salesforce org, any imports of leads like that should go through Pardot for deduplication reasons. We'll talk about that more a bit later. But yeah, so you can create prospects via an import. You can create them manually. They can be created by a sync, so from Salesforce or by another synced app, or they are automatically created when somebody submits a form that feeds into Pardot. And we have two types of forms in Pardot. We have a basic Pardot form and a form handler. Pardot form is the preferred option unless there is a reason not to. And they're easy to use, easy to set up, so marketing users can do them without any coding. They're easy to update and make changes to. You can use one form in multiple places, and if you update a field in the form in Pardot, that will update across all of those different places that the form is being used. So that's really useful. And you've also, if you use a form, got access to advanced Pardot features such as progressive profiling, which is where the system can tell whether somebody has filled out certain information already, and do things like, if we already know what their company name is, then ask them what their company size is instead. And then on the other side we have form handlers, and these are basic integrations. So if you have a form existing on your website already, you can build Pardot to a form handler in Pardot to accept that form post into Pardot. So this is useful with if you've got a really custom design, because obviously with Pardot you're limited as to the design you can use. So if you've got a really custom design, you could use a form handler instead. If you've already got an existing form, you just want to change where it posts to. And also if you're trying to integrate with other systems, that can be really useful as well. And so they can be used in different ways. So you can use a basic Pardot form on a Pardot landing page, and that's where you build the page in Pardot itself, and they work very well together. You can also include a form in one of your website pages, and you can do this via an iframe. You just paste the HTML in, it's very simple, and that will still update. Any changes you make in Pardot will update automatically on the website. And then obviously you can also use form handlers on your website, but this is where you code it yourself and you just point it to Pardot. The way that Pardot forms are styled is using a layout template. So the Pardot layout template is an HTML that you upload, HTML and CSS, and it governs the design of forms and landing pages themselves. So you can use it all together to style that content within Pardot. And obviously, of course, it doesn't control anything outside of Pardot. So it won't control the style of your form handlers or your website. Okay, and now we're on to my favorite part of Pardot, which is the engagement studio. So this is the really nice canvas where you can build your nurture journeys. There are 3 different things you can do in Pardot. Sorry, excuse me. There are three different things you can do in the engagement studio. And they are color coded, so keep an eye out for those. But we have actions, triggers, and rules. But the best way to take a look at them is to actually go into Pardot itself. So this is the engagement studio. Actually, I think I've got an example I can show you here. So this is the canvas that you would use to build out your journeys. So at the start, you choose a recipient list. So that's why when I said lists are important, it's because you would do something like this with them to add your, so any prospect that is added to this list will be automatically added to this journey. And you'll see we've got this little plus button here. That's where we choose to add a node. And the things that you can do in the journey are an action to do something. So an obvious one is to send an email. You can assign to a user, change a field value. You can even create a Salesforce task, which is really useful for more advanced things that you want to sync back. So you can, and that's what we've got here. We've got an email sent here. The next option you can choose is a trigger, which is here, which is where you listen for something the prospect does. So we've got here, we've sent an email, and now we're looking to see whether the prospect has opened the email. There are various other things you can look for. So you can look to see whether they've clicked a link in an email, whether they've clicked a specific link you've built from Pardot, whether they've completed a form or a landing page. So, and then obviously that's a decision split. So we've asked a question, have they opened this email? On the right hand side is either yes branch, on the left is a no branch. And the final thing you can check for is a rule. And this is field information, so any custom field or default field information, whether they're unsubscribed or not, whether they're a member of a Salesforce campaign, whether they're a lead or contact in Salesforce, what their score is, or in this example here, what their grade is. And again, it's a decision split, so we can do different things based on the whether or not it's yes or no to that question. And you can build really nice advanced journeys here. The one thing that usually catches people is the timing. So you can see here we've got one here with a wait step. You can choose to put a wait step on an action or on a rule. A trigger has a more interesting wait step. So you'll notice we've got two here. We've got, you can wait up to a maximum of days. And this means that if I put here, wait up to a maximum of 3 days, as soon as someone clicked open to the email, they would immediately go down the yes branch. But after 3 days, if nobody who clicked the email, they would go down the no branch. And if somebody clicked if somebody opened the email after 1 day, they would go down the yes branch after 1 day. So you can do that and have it a bit more dynamic, or you can just keep a basic wait step, which says wait 3 days and then ask whether or not they've opened the email. So you do have a few options here. I could do a whole session on this, so I'm trying not to go into too much detail. But you'll see it's really, really powerful. There's a lot you can do here. And anything that you can't do in Pardot, you can do by syncing back to Salesforce. And this tends to be something that users really love, because this is where they can really get the use and the value from nurturing those journeys. And as I showed you before, because the recipient list is just a list, so you can see here we've got London latest jobs. From my lead page, I can add, well, I can't here because I've unsubscribed myself, but I can add, here we go, we've got a list called Add to Nurture Program, and that list, if it was the recipient list, would automatically add someone to that journey. The other thing to be aware of is that you can add suppression lists here as well, so you can use more advanced filtering. But it's also, when we were talking about a static list and dynamic list before, if this journey was built on a dynamic list, so for example, somebody with an open opportunity in stage 5, if they closed that opportunity, they would be automatically removed from the journey. So you can easily keep up to date as you go. And we also have reporting capability. So this is obviously a very basic example. It's not really a journey, but you can see here that this is a journey that has been running. So we've got some data, even if it's only one prospect. And you can get a percentage here of the breakdown of which paths people went down, as well as the numbers involved. And you can actually click into those when you're looking at the reporting and see who those people were exactly. So you can get some really nice data, and it's a really useful piece of kit. Okay, so I'll move on from that. And I've written quite a few blog posts about the Engagement Studio. So if you do want a bit more information about things you can do, I can send those out afterwards. Okay, and then this is more kind of talking about the back end stuff. So we also have Pardot automation rules. And this is a really nice infographic that Salesforce themselves have produced, which helps you choose which type of rule to use. So in a similar way to whether you would use workflow rules or process builder to do something, this infographic is helping you choose whether you would use a completion action or a segmentation rule, etc. Well, you'll notice that there are a couple of, well, probably only one of these actually we've seen already. So we've already had a look at the dynamic list, which is based on criteria. It's not one time only, and the result is an updated list. So that's we would want a dynamic list. We've got things like completion actions, which is where if somebody completes out a form, we want this to happen. And the one that we're just going to have a look at now is the automation rule. Because this is actually probably the most powerful feature in Pardot. And with that comes a little bit of danger, but I'll just show you what that looks like quickly so you can get an idea of the other kind of things that you could do. So we go to automation rules, add automation rule, and I'm just going to skip all this because I'm not going to save it. But you'll notice that we have two steps, that we have rules and actions. And the first step is building the rules in exactly the same way that we did for a dynamic list. So we could choose, I might choose something different here. I might choose prospect custom field. Marketing status is, actually, let's choose a different field. Favorite color. is blue. So you'll see we choose the rules and we build the criteria for who these rules will affect in much the same way. We don't have a huge amount of flexibility around what data we can pull in, so you might need to be a little bit creative. What I will say is you can choose, because you can use a prospect CRM campaign, any filtering that you're struggling to do within Pardot itself, you could do the filtering in Salesforce, put them in a campaign, and then just pull that information through. So that is a possibility. And then these are the actions. So these are all of the things that we can do with a rule. These will work in the background. We can add to list, add to campaign, adjust score. We can do things with the sync. I won't go into too much detail on that today. Assign via the Salesforce active assignment rule. So this is a particularly useful one. If you've got assignment rules set up in Salesforce already, you don't want to be overriding them or skipping them. You can just push Pardot prospects to Salesforce to be created as leads, and they will then be assigned out using the assignment rules you've already got in place. So that's really helpful. But you can also do things like update field values, set them to not sync to Salesforce, various other things. So you do need to be careful with automation rules, because it's quite easy to, well, it's not easy, but it's possible to accidentally update the whole database. So I would say don't let junior people do it. If you've got the highest edition of Pardot, I can't remember what it's called now. It used to be called Ultimate. You can set custom user roles, so you can specify who has access to these automation roles. But yeah, so these can be really useful for doing things in the background and performing updates, etc., that you can't do in other places. Okay, and we had a brief look at scoring and grading. They're two separate things, and they work really nicely together. So scoring is a mark of prospect activity, so web pages they've visited, email links they've clicked, and it shows how interested they are in us. Grading is based on demographic data, so things like job title or location, and it shows how interested we are in them. And grading you set up using a combination of rules and profiles, but you would do it like this. So you would choose, for example, your category 1 would be a job title, and then you would choose 3 different tiers of your of job titles that you're interested in. So for example, maybe CEO or managing director is the top tier, and manager is the second tier. And you can also have negative tiers. So maybe if somebody's job title was a student, that would remove a grade from them. And all of these adjustments are incremental. So they would move the letter up and down, so from C to A or back down, to get an overall picture based on all of the data that we had on someone of what letter grade that person is. And it doesn't have to be a solid number, it can be A minus. And this is really useful for sales teams when it comes to prioritizing, especially if they get 100 leads a day and they don't know how to deal with them all. This is really helpful to sales teams for prioritizing who to speak to first, because by seeing who's most interested and by seeing who is most likely to be a good fit for our company. Okay, and then finally, just some more limitations and troubleshooting. So I know that we've discussed a few as we've gone through, but things to be aware of. The Pardot API is very limited. You can't do any deletes. You can only do creates and updates, and obviously only on the prospect record, not on any other record. In most cases, if you're looking to use the Pardot API, it's probably not the right solution. And in fact, most API integrations will actually go through Salesforce instead of Pardot. So just be aware of that. It is possible to use it, but it's not particularly flexible. Sync errors we mentioned already. You don't get an alert if there is a sync error, so it is important to keep checking on those. And as a Salesforce admin, that will be the first thing that you have to look at, probably, or the thing that you have to keep an eye on. And it will be things like data issues, so invalid pick list values, validation rules, anything like that could be causing a sync error. So it is important to keep an eye on that. Duplicates are a big issue in Pardot if you're not managing them. A duplicate lead in Salesforce, if you've got the connector set to create prospects in Pardot from Salesforce, will create duplicate prospect records. And there is no option, there is no app exchange with Pardot. And there's no option to mass merge prospects. You can merge prospects, but you have to do it one by one, which if you've got thousands isn't really an option. So be very careful with duplicates. Keep an eye on your Salesforce data, clean it up before you import it into Pardot. Pardot will automatically dedupe on import. If you use the Pardot import wizard, it will dedupe by email address. So that's why once you've got the systems connected, encourage your marketing team not to do any list imports from things like events in Salesforce. It should all be done in Pardot. You can read custom objects in Pardot. You need to buy, it's an extra feature to enable the system to read custom objects. And I think you buy 4 at first, and then you can buy additional ones after that. Again, you can't do any updating of custom objects. It just allows you to read field data on them. Reporting in Pardot is also very limited unless you have the B2B marketing analytics. I'll just show you very quickly. You do have some nice things around kind of, you can see we've got click-through rates, delivery rates, etc. So you do have some nice statistics around that, but you don't, you can't actually adjust this. You can't adjust the columns in any way. So there's much more that can be done, obviously, with B2B marketing analytics, and there's much more that can be done with Salesforce now with the latest releases. If you have engagement history set up, you can report on that email data at the campaign level in Salesforce. And finally, Pardot is, you don't have licenses, so you can have as many users as you like. But the pricing is scaled based on database size. So the basic setup is 10,000 prospects, 10,000 records. And that's mailable prospects, so unsubscribed prospects don't count. And if you want to go beyond that, if you have a bigger database of like 150,000 or even just 15,000, you have to speak to Salesforce and get and pay to have more. But that's usually done on implementation anyway. Okay, so I'm sorry I covered a lot. I kind of whizzed through as quickly as I could, so I hope that was clear. And yeah, does anyone have any questions?
So there are a couple of questions posted on the chat window. If you can read and answer, that will be really great. And guys, if you have any question, feel free to unmute yourself and ask the question directly to Jessica.
Okay, so all right. Just going through the first ones. Okay, so is Pardot an App Exchange product? No, so Pardot is on the App Exchange technically, but it's just almost as an advertising listing. You have to speak to a Salesforce AE to buy it. There is an installed and managed package that goes into Salesforce, but you have to have purchased Pardot, and you have to download that via the help.salesforce.com rather than the App Exchange. Okay. Can we create a free Pardot account for practice? So no, you can't get a developer org in the same way that you can with Salesforce. if you are a Pardot customer, you should be allowed a training environment, which is what I'm using here. But they only allow that to partners or to existing Pardot customers. Okay.
So just one question here.
Mhm.
In case we want to evaluate the Pardot, do they allow provide any environment, the Salesforce, if they request?
Like a trial?
Yeah, just to evaluate something like if we're not the Pardot customer yet.
No, no, not typically. You might be able to get a short-term contract, but they don't offer anything like a 1-month trial or anything like that.
Okay, thank you.
Is there any limit on the number of senders we can mail at once using Pardot? No. It can take a while to process. If you're sending, if you're emailing a few 100,000 people, it could take. I don't actually want to give figures on this because I'm not sure, but it'll probably process them in. Well, it's not instant. It's not instant in the same way that Marketing Cloud is. But there's no limit to the number of emails that you can send. All limits are done by the number of prospects, mailable prospects you have in your database. Okay, I think that was all the questions in chat.